their home all the way through the trip.
We're leaving this recorded program now for a live Senate subcommittee hearing, also on aviation. United Airlines President Scott Kirby and trade organization leaders testify before this Senate panel on the current state of airline travel and consumer protections. They include Chicago's Transportation Commissioner, a flight attendants union official, and the head of the National Consumers League.
The hearing will come to order. Certainly pleased to have our witnesses today and members of the committee. We're going to all try to minimize the time we spend talking so we can maximize questions and what we can learn from those. Certainly impossible to ignore the public outcry with incidents that have involved passengers, as recently, I believe, even as yesterday. One of the most widely reported instances, of course, was at Chicago with United Flight 3411, and lots of lessons to be learned, and I'm sure we're going to hear what some of those lessons learned both with the airport and the airline and the industry are today. In looking at what happened, Senator Cantwell and I, along with Chairman Thune and Mr. Nelson, Senator Nelson, really sent an immediate letter, and that letter said the last thing a paying airline customer should expect is to be physically taken off an airline, and the purpose of today's hearing is to follow up on the letters we sent, the responses we got, and really to find out what went wrong and what are we going to do to be sure that doesn't happen in the future. This is a year where FAA reauthorization needs to occur between now and September the 30th, and part of this hearing is to determine what's going to be taken care of without the Congress and what needs to be taken care of in the federal law itself. So I'm going to turn to Senator Cantwell for her opening comments, and then we'll come to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start, I just want to enter into the record a letter from the Paralyzed Veterans of America discussing the challenges they have faced as disabled passengers when they fly, if I could do that.
Good.
Thank you.
Without objection.
Thank you, Chairman Blunt, for convening this hearing, and thanks to the witnesses for being here to discuss the many important topics that are being raised today. It would be safe to say that all of us were deeply disturbed by the images of Dr. Dow bloodied and dazed being dragged from the aisle of a plane last month in Chicago. For a passenger who presented no threat to safety or security of a flight to be treated that way is completely unnecessary and unacceptable. United has acknowledged as much, and we owe it to the traveling public to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The United incident in Chicago has not been the only airline incident to gain national attention recently, and we need to look at the policies and procedures across the entire industry to help address and improve the experience for the flying public. You need to ask yourselves as providers, are you prioritizing those shareholder profits over the basic needs of consumers? The airline industry as a whole needs to explore sensible ways to fix the traveling experience for our passengers. As our commercial air system continues to grow, airports are more congested, travelers have fewer options, the flying public understands because they see it every time when they fly. The seats are fuller and becoming smaller, by the way. Tempers are flaring. And if you run into trouble, if your flight is canceled or you miss a connection, you're out of luck. Airplanes are flying full, and in many cases, seats aren't available to accommodate displaced passengers, and capacity in many cases is rising slowly, if at all, as a competition has disappeared, even as those 83% of seats being filled. In the state of Washington, SeaTac International has been one of the fastest growing airports with 3 consecutive years, and passengers have been feeling that squeeze as well. We've had hearings here about how we're addressing that from a TSA and Homeland Security perspective. But as a result, the industry's growth in passengers, too many airports are facing long lines at security, and they are facing crowded terminals, gateways. So we need to do our part and make sure the flying experience for the public is also focused on the needs of the flying public. We need to find improvements at our airports that will allow for room and competition, and I believe that we need to make sure that our airports have access to our customers. I do appreciate the steps that United and their partners in the many industries are taking to improve passenger experience. And as airlines have brought in record profits, they have made some investments back into their product. But the fact we're here today to hear about is that across the industry, we need to continue to make more steps towards that passenger experience. I know that when my former colleague was here, Senator Boxer, we talked about those elements of a passenger bill of rights, just making sure when passengers were delayed on runways or held on flight with an extraordinary amount of time, that they just got basic needs taken care of, like access to water or food, and making sure that they had clear understanding. I think it may be time for a new passenger bill of rights to make sure that we're focusing on the consumer experience, making sure that consumers aren't left, that we are doing things that are appropriate and necessary to make sure that they are protected in these incidents. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, and Senator Nelson, the ranking member of the committee is here. Senator Nelson, if you'd like to make a few comments before we start, that would be
Thank you,
great.
Mr. Chairman. I would, because of the gravity of this situation. What happened to Dr. Dow is just simply unconscionable. And I'm sorry, Mr. Kirby, that you're sent here as the president, number two, to be the sacrificial lamb. It ought to be your CEO, who I know personally and who is a wonderful person and who has overcome great personal medical challenges and was beginning to get such a good reputation. But anybody who's served in the military understands that the captain of the ship is in fact responsible, and it ought to be the CEO. And for the life of me, barring any safety reasons, security reasons, which was certainly not the case here, no passenger should ever be treated like this on an airline. Now, I understand that you've made several changes following the incident, and we all appreciate those efforts. But this is a subtext and a foretelling of larger issues, because the airline industry in this country has become anti-competitive, and consumers are being hurt in the process. Talk to most any passenger, and they feel like they're being treated as self-loading cargo rather than the way they should be, as very valued customers. They feel taken advantage of, and they're getting sick and tired of it. And you talk to anybody that travels. And what I'm worrying about, is this a consequence of all the mergers so that we only have a handful of airlines and they basically don't have the competition? And so many of the passengers now have become self-described detectives by using their cell phone to record incidents where their fellow passengers are being unfairly or unjustly treated. And I take no pleasure in beating up on the airlines, but in this case, it is warranted, and it's a good thing we're having this hearing because of what it portends for the future. So all of us have experienced firsthand, or we've heard from folks back home about incidents. The explosion of fees, such as checked baggage, priority boarding, assigned seating, that are not always clear. We tried to straighten out some of this in last year's FAA bill. We're going to get another crack at it this year. and the IT systems of airlines are failing and causing prolonged confusion and delays. And passengers with disabilities, and that's why I'm glad you put in the disabled veterans letter. They're having to deal with poorly trained personnel, or the wheelchairs are mishandled and damaged. And then add to the insult to injury, just yesterday, we learned that American Airlines, and I wish we had had the CEO of American here, we learned that American Airlines is getting ready to buy 100 new Boeing 737 jets. They call them MAX jets, and they're going to cram another 10 seats in. And so, in an article which I will enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, with your permission,
Without objection,
American Airlines is cutting more legroom, economy class. They say that in ordering these Boeing 737 MAX jetliners, that they'll shrink the distance between seats, which is known as pitch, from 31 to 29 inches. And in this article, it points out, whereas right now, Delta, American, and Southwest are 31 inches. United is 30. Spirit is 28. And American, by these new jets, 10 more seats cramped in. I wonder how you handled, Ms. Nelson, that flight attendants having to deal with 10 more passengers cramped in, 29 inches. It'll only be rivaled by Spirit at 28, and Virgin has 32 inches, and JetBlue has 34 inches. But JetBlue and Virgin aren't the big four. So, while these are certainly not new complaints, they seem to be getting worse in the public's eye. And the fact is that we wouldn't be sitting here today if the traveling public believed that the airlines cared more about them than they're caring about the do-re-mi. And this is happening, and you all need to face it. 2 years ago, the Democrats on this committee released a report on the airline's lack of transparency on the growing number of fees charged to passengers that called on the airlines to stop nickel and diming the traveling public. And what's happened since? Fees continue to go up while the airlines fight behind the scenes in Washington to kill any proposal. We had that. They killed some of them. Last year's FAA bill, some of them we got in. But compounding all of this is the fact that many consumers don't have a lot of choices if they are fed up with the service at their local airport. So where is the competition? And so according to one recent study of the U.S. Travel Association, the Big Four currently controls over 50% of the seat capacity on flights out of 155 airports. So that doesn't sound real competitive to me. So here we are with an industry facing self-inflicted PR problems, sitting before us asking for our forgiveness and to allow them to fix their own problems. Mr. Chairman, I am a strong believer in savings and in being saved and redemption, and I truly hope the airlines are sincere and their corrective actions match their words. But when I see 10 more passengers being crammed in to the same size aircraft, I have questions. So I think most Americans would want to return to the friendly skies. And that said, let this senator be clear. If I have anything to do with it as the ranking member of the full committee, this committee is not going to sit back and wait and see approach. We've acted in a bipartisan fashion in the past to protect the flying public, and we're prepared to do so again when we begin later this year on the FAA authorization bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Well, we have with us today Ginger Evans, who's the Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Aviation, Scott Kirby, the President of United Airlines, Sharon Pinkerton, Senior Vice President, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs for Airlines of America, Sara Nelson, the International President of the Association of Flight Attendants, and Sally Greenberg, the Executive Director of the National Consumer League. So we are pleased that you're here. We look forward to your testimony. We have your testimony, but would love to have you handle your 5 minutes however you want, but we will run that clock pretty tight. So in no more than 25 minutes, we're to questions. And Commissioner Evans, we'll let you start.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Blunt, Ranking Member Cantwell, and the members of the committee for asking me to be here today to testify on the important issue of safety at our airports. We can all agree that the events that took place on the night of Sunday, April 9th, 2017 were completely unacceptable. And on behalf of the Chicago Department of Aviation, I want to offer Dr. Dow and his family my sincerest apology. As someone who spent more than 3 decades in the aviation industry, that a passenger of one of our airports was injured in this way is deeply saddening and personally offensive to me. This is not how we do business, and these actions will not be tolerated. As the Commissioner of Chicago's Department of Aviation, overseeing both O'Hare and Midway International Airports, the safety and well-being of the flying public remains our highest priority. It is imperative that our employees interact with passengers in a manner that not only protects their safety, but also conveys dignity and respect. We have strong security plans in place, coordinated with our partners in the federal government. These plans establish roles and responsibilities for a multi-layered security response system. This system works together to prevent terrorist threats and breaches of security, while ensuring continued confiscation of weapons, explosive detection, and general security for persons working in and traveling through our airports. These plans help ensure that more than 100 million passengers safely travel through O'Hare International Airport and Midway International Airport each and every year. We continue to adapt our safety and security policies, procedures, and practices in order to respond to new and changing threats, both external and internal. However, based on my review, the security officers involved in the incident on United Flight 3411 broke from our standard procedures and failed to provide Dr. Dow and his family the respect we demand be given to all of the traveling public flying in and out of Chicago. These actions are not condoned by the Chicago Department of Aviation. To address what occurred, we initiated an immediate administrative review. Based on that review, 4 personnel were put on leave. The interviews and findings of our administrative review were given to the City of Chicago's Office of Inspector General. The details of the communication and actions during the response to the request for officers are now the subject of an expedited disciplinary investigation by the Inspector General. Our immediate review showed that the actions of these officers were not in accordance with the Chicago Department of Aviation's directives. Our policy is clear that force should only be used when absolutely necessary to protect the security and safety of our passengers. Our policy states, and I quote, "The safety of innocent persons and bystanders must be given primary consideration whenever the use of force is contemplated." Further, my department launched a separate review of our security resources and policies to identify changes that might clarify and strengthen security roles and procedures. While we cannot reverse what took place, as a department, we are taking action to ensure this never happens again. We have moved quickly to institute several changes that I would like to share with you today. First, United Airlines announced that effective April 12th, they will request officers only for issues involving safety and security. We are working with our other tenant airlines to standardize this policy and ensure complete consistency throughout our 2 airports. Effective April 10th, Chicago Department of Aviation airport security officers will no longer board aircraft. unless there's an immediate medical issue or imminent physical threat on board with great bodily harm at risk. The Chicago Police Department will continue to take the lead in responding to disturbances on aircraft, which they have done very ably, while the main duty of airport security officers will continue to be to enforce federal regulations governing airport safety and security in restricted areas of the airport. While the airport security officers are specifically trained on airfield perimeter patrol and aircraft movement areas, they are not designated law enforcement authority at our airports. Third, we are in the final stage of obtaining an international aviation security expert to partner with us to conduct a comprehensive review of our security program, including policies, procedures, staff functions, facilities, and technology, to ensure that we are not only meeting current best practices, but also thinking forward and positioning ourselves to respond to the ever-changing security environment. While these measures represent an important step forward, more work remains to be done. We will continue to assess both our staff and our facilities to meet our most important mission of safely supporting each and every passenger that moves through our airports. We are also initiating a very comprehensive plan with our airline partners to modernize and improve Chicago O'Hare for the purpose of serving our customers more comfortably. In closing, I'd like to state once again that we are deeply sorry for the events that took place on April 9th. We are redoubling our efforts to strengthen our security systems, policies, procedures, and training programs to ensure they work together to keep all of our passengers safe.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Kirby.
Chairman Blunt, Ranking Member Cantwell, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to address the subcommittee on this important matter today. My name is Scott Kirby, and I'm the President of United Airlines, here today representing our 87,000 employees. On April 9th, our airline broke the public trust in an incident that should have never happened. I apologize again to Dr. Dow, his family, to every passenger on Flight 3411, and to all our customers and employees around the world. And I'm very sorry for our company's inadequate response to the initial incident. No customer should have ever been treated the way that Dr. Dow was. We promised to complete a full analysis of what happened on Flight 3411, including where we fell short and the actions we needed to take to change the customer experience at United. 1 week ago today, we released our report, which identified 4 key failures. First, we called on law enforcement when a safety or security situation did not exist. Second, we booked crew at the very last minute, even though Flight 3411 was full. Third, we failed to provide our employees with the authority to offer enough compensation or alternative travel options to give the incentive to a passenger to give up a seat. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, our employees did not have the authority to do what was right for our customers. A series of United Airlines policies put our employees, law enforcement, and our customers in an impossible position. In an industry like ours, safety is always our top priority, and rules are critical to ensuring a safe operation. But in this instance, where safety wasn't the issue, we let rules and operating procedures stand in the way of common sense. Our report announced several immediate and near-term changes that we're making to prevent an issue like this from happening again and improve the customer experience. First, unless safety or security is an issue, we will never again ask a customer to give up their seat once they're on board or ask law enforcement to remove a customer from a flight. We're giving our employees more authority to offer up to $10,000 to customers when we do have an oversold situation. When a customer chooses to give up their seat, we'll have a team dedicated to finding them alternative travel options. And when crew needs to travel on a flight, we'll ensure they're booked at least an hour before departure. At the same time, we've also eliminated the red tape around lost bags by instituting a no-questions-asked $1,500 reimbursement for permanently lost luggage. This is a turning point for United Airlines. I do believe that we're a better airline today than we were before because of this terrible incident. And we'll be a better airline tomorrow because as these changes are fully implemented. All of us at United are working incredibly hard to re-earn your trust and the trust of our customers around the world, and to provide our customers with the respect and service that they deserve. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Ms. Pinkerton.
Good morning, Chairman Blunt, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sharon Pinkerton. I'm the Senior Vice President of Policy at Airlines for America. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We want the traveling public and this committee to know that the nation's airlines are listening. Like you, we found the events that transpired around the April 9th incident unacceptable. The industry fully accepts that it is our responsibility to ensure that such behavior and disrespect of a passenger can never happen again. We also know that deep regret and apologies, however sincere, are no substitute for meaningful solutions and action. To meet that responsibility, our carriers immediately reviewed why and how the situation developed, and importantly, where necessary, are making systemic changes based on that review. And these aren't superficial changes. They range from changes in overbooking policies, the processes in place for decision-making, and enabling frontline employees more discretion in managing certain situations. Just a few examples of the concrete steps that a variety of carriers are taking: completely eliminating or reducing overbooking, ensuring that no passenger is involuntarily removed from a flight for another passenger, renewing their focus, and I think this is very important, on training for all customer-facing staff to make sure they're taking care of passengers, not just getting them safely from point to point. And finally, providing passengers with more transparency and understanding about what their rights are as consumers. While these are some of the policy changes already being implemented, carriers are continuing to review a broad array of policies to improve customer service, because we know passengers have choices in who they fly. Carriers compete not only on price, but also on customer service. So every one of the 800 million passengers who fly U.S. carriers annually deserve both a safe and pleasant experience. The results of competition, which I've heard a lot about, can be directly seen in our record-breaking improvements in the 2016 DOT customer service metrics for better on-time flight arrivals, better flight completion, and nearly 100% properly handled bag delivery. When our operational service metrics improve, it's no surprise, so does customer satisfaction. This relationship has been shown in independent surveys that J.D. Power has done, which recently reported that North American airline satisfaction has climbed to a 10-year high. Now, while we've made progress, I know we need to improve. For context, I do think it's important to recognize that the turmoil of the bankruptcies in this industry, 9/11, mergers, that many carriers went through, impacted our employees. They lost pensions. So many carriers weren't making the necessary investments in their product and their people. We've got some catching up to do. The financial stability of the last 6 years has enabled the industry to make record investments of up to $1.5 billion per month in the customer experience. That investment includes new contracts for employees, new and cleaner planes, and new service, which is all driving the improvements we see today. This committee, we hope, should recognize the facts, the official data that clearly show that airline competition is intense. In fact, it's thriving. More people are flying today. They're doing so at lower prices to more destinations than ever. Consumers have seen enormous and quantifiable benefits from a thriving and competitive marketplace. Just last month, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics reported that the fourth quarter 2016 average fare was down 26% from 2000. And if you include ancillary fees, 22% down. Since 1995, real fares declined 23%, and if you include ancillary fees, still down almost 20%. In addition, communities across America have seen benefits from a thriving competitive aviation marketplace. While all types of U.S. airports have gotten more air service over the last several years, 176 small and non-hub airports have seen more seats in their market. In addition to seats, airlines have added 198 new routes in 2016 and 151 in 2017. Flyers have seen on net a net expansion of 54 nonstop routes to and from U.S. airports. Senators, this industry does good things for people by connecting them to their families and friends and being an enabler of business. We hope that the recent but rare, although unacceptable incidents don't completely eclipse the dignity and respect shown by airline employees to millions of travelers every day. Airlines recognize the onus is on us to foster a customer-centric culture at each airline. We commit to you and the traveling public this industry will continue to work diligently and quickly to address any actions needed to ensure that all passengers are treated with dignity and respect.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. Ms. Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman Blunt, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. The Association of Flight Attendants represents 50,000 flight attendants at 20 airlines, and we partner with the Communications Workers of America, who represent nearly 20,000 customer service agents. Together, we help tens of thousands of flights get up in the air safely and even often sometimes inspire smiles. But in order to recognize the realities of aviation today, we must look back to the sea change events of September 11, 2001. Following the grief of losing our friends and flying partners, our profession and industry changed forever. Over 100,000 aviation jobs were lost nearly overnight. Most airlines entered bankruptcy and some did not emerge. We lost on average 40% in pay, pensions were terminated, work rules were eviscerated, staffing was cut to minimums, and many of the amenities of flying were removed as we had fewer tools to appease weary travelers. Airlines lost billions of dollars, and for nearly 10 years, the driving force was to cut costs in every area but executive compensation. Cabin interiors were redesigned with smaller seats closer together. Bankruptcies gave way to airline mergers to cut capacity in the industry so that planes are fuller than ever with more seats, less legroom, and carry-on baggage at all-time highs as checked baggage fees drove more luggage to the airplane door. Flight attendants are working anywhere from 25 to 50% more hours on the job to make ends meet, while fatigue studies commissioned by Congress show cabin crew are not getting enough rest. Even though ticket prices are 40% below 1980 levels when adjusted for inflation, airlines are making money again through capacity cuts, ancillary fees, and reduction in fuel prices. Today, U.S. carriers must also compete with predatory Gulf carriers who enter the U.S. market and boast lavish amenities because they are subsidized with over $50 billion from their governments. As long as our government fails to enforce the open skies agreements that prohibit this, the burden of cost-cutting will hit further on employees and consumers. American announced just this week the airline is adding more seats to the aircraft by reducing legroom to 29 inches. This is going to have a direct impact on flight attendants, who will have to answer to angry passengers enraged by the lack of room. Meanwhile, these same flight attendants are reporting they are sick from toxic uniforms and contaminated cabin air. And Wall Street was in an uproar when their pay was adjusted to an industry average a few weeks ago at the rate that might cover a family's utility bill, because shareholders whined it might be taken out of their returns. When Delta had another IT crew scheduling meltdown that left passengers stranded for nearly a week, the flight attendants without a union contract were left on duty in excess of 24 hours, facing passengers and having to de-escalate tensions while standing on hold to get through to the company for more than 10 hours. Every day, flight attendants working at U.S. airlines or based in the U.S. help tens of thousands of flights and millions of passengers travel safely to their destination and without incident. This has become more challenging in recent years, with task saturation at boarding and staffing cut significantly to FAA minimums. There is a rising tension on board in our flights, in our experience exacerbated by a national narrative full of disrespect for authority, decency, and decorum, and fewer of aviation's first responders to manage it. De-escalating conflict between passengers has become a significant portion of the work flight attendants perform on each flight. Without recognition of our role and authority in the cabin, we are very concerned about the dangerous conditions flight attendants may be facing at work. When flight attendants simply attempt to do safety compliance checks, they are greeted with refusal and the response, "What are you going to do, drag me out of here?" We don't have the option to call for help from authorities in the air, and on the ground we are experiencing some authorities refusing to respond because they don't want to end up on the news either. Flight attendants are caught in the middle, and safety and security will suffer. Aviation safety regulations didn't materialize out of thin air. It was a deadly crash of British Air Tours Flight 28M in 1985, where some deaths were attributed to seat configuration at the exit rows and children seated there who couldn't get the exits open, that led to the requirements in the exit row seats. 6 years later, in 1991, U.S. Airways Flight 1493 crashed with SkyWest Flight 5569, and further exit row requirements were identified as necessary. When tragedy strikes, we make changes and vow never again. We have to mean it. Now, flight attendants are challenged, ignored, or chastised for these safety checks. Cabin crew are left to wonder what's worse, failing to comply with federal regulations as part of our job, or doing the safety-sensitive work and ending up on the evening news or facing discipline from management because someone didn't like the instruction they gave. The reality is that the vast majority of passengers come to the plane with kindness in their hearts and a desire to have a peaceful, uneventful flight. Look at the focus on aviation. It is a fascinating topic for the public and garners more publicity than almost any other industry. Our airlines, the crews and passengers fly to every corner of the earth when some can only dream of crossing borders. It is one of our greatest symbols and expressions of freedom. Our U.S. industry generates $1.2 trillion in economic activity and supports 10 million jobs. And for these reasons, it continues to be a target of those who wish to wage war against America. We can't afford to get this wrong. We can't afford to dismiss safety and security. Flight attendants cannot effectively do our jobs without passengers recognizing the necessity of following crew member instructions. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. There is so much more to discuss about staffing, surveillance of crew movement, security concerns, and all of the realities of aviation today. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. We'll see if we can get to this so much more here in a minute. Ms. Greenberg.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Blunt and Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the Aviation Subcommittee. I'm Sally Greenberg, Executive Director of the National Consumers League, and we appreciate the invitation to be here today. 3 weeks ago, America saw in the shocking video of David Dow's violent removal from United Flight 3411 the predictable result of a lack of effective competition and consumer protection in the U.S. airline industry. What happened on that flight symbolizes a problem that is not unique to United. Indeed, as subsequent incidents on American Airlines and Delta and countless others, which did not go viral, demonstrate, power in the airline industry has become dangerously unbalanced. It's time for Congress to take action to assure consumers that the next time they fly, they won't become the unwitting star of their own viral video. How have we gotten to this point? In a word, competition, or more specifically, the lack thereof. In the last decade alone, mergers have reduced 9 large airlines to 4, American, Delta, Southwest, and United. Together, these 4 control more than 80% of all domestic flights. At a staggering 93 of the top 100 airports, only 1 or 2 airlines control a majority of the seats. According to the GAO, from 2007 to 2013, 1.2 million scheduled domestic flights were eliminated as the big 4 carriers gobbled up competitors. Smaller communities in particular were hard hit by this march toward oligopoly. For example, in 2008, San Antonio lost approximately 600 jobs when AT&T relocated its corporate headquarters to Dallas. The company actually said in a press release, being headquartered near leading air transportation facilities is critical to global companies like AT&T as the airline industry continues to consolidate and reduce hubs and flights, end quote. The industry has also sought to generate profits by literally squeezing passengers. Last year, average load factors topped 80% for the 8th consecutive year, and the average distance between rows, as Senator Nelson has described in great detail, the average distance before regulation, it was 35 inches, and today it's about 31 inches. American Airlines, as Senator Nelson has indicated, is set to even reduce those distances to smaller sizes. So Americans are getting bigger, we're getting heavier, and we're being crammed into smaller and smaller spaces. So all of this consolidation has resulted in higher prices for consumers, despite what you might hear this morning. A Wall Street Journal analysis of airfares, including add-on fees, found that from 2007 to 2014, a period coinciding with the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the price of the average round-trip domestic flight increased nearly 16%. These independent numbers stand in contrast to industry claims that it's never been better or cheaper to fly. There are steps that Congress could take and should take in the near term to address the worst impacts of the lack of competition. First, as the United incident vividly illustrated, airline bumping policies can lead to shockingly negative outcomes for consumers. Involuntary bumping should never occur in a competitive market. So airlines should be required to maintain interline agreements with other airlines to ensure that paying passengers who are bumped make it to their final destination with as little delay as possible. Second, the power imbalance between airlines and their passengers can no longer lie solely with the airlines. For example, consumers should be made aware in clear and conspicuous language of their rights at the time of purchase their tickets, that they purchase their tickets via posters at the gate and at ticket counters. Passengers need access as well to the legal system to hold airlines accountable for their promises. Third, there seems to be no limit to outrageous charges for basic necessities such as guaranteed seats, a piece of luggage, or the need to reschedule a flight. NCL, along with 10 other national consumer and passenger organizations, supported and do support Senator Markey's and Senator Blumenthal's Fair Fees Act, which would prohibit airlines from charging cancellation baggage and other ancillary fees that are unreasonable or disproportionate to the costs incurred by the air carrier. The DOT should also strengthen its consumer protection policies to match or exceed those that are available to consumers in the European Union for things like compensation for delays, cancellations, or involuntary bumping. Finally, Congress should pass a comprehensive passenger Bill of Rights which addresses these and other pressing consumer protection priorities, such as minimum seat standards and fair policies overall. In conclusion, consumers are angry, they're frustrated. We need members of the subcommittee to be in our corner to promote consumer rights and protections and to restore some semblance of balance and fairness between passengers and the airlines. Thank you to members of the subcommittee for inviting us, inviting the consumer perspective. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Greenberg. There are going to be a number of members here, and we'll try to keep our question time to 5 minutes in the order that people came to the committee, with the exception of the chairman. If he shows up, we'll give him the same courtesy we gave the ranking member when he was here. Mr. Kirby, what kind of flexibility do your gate agents and your flight attendants have in terms of trying to deal with overbooking? And while you're dealing with that, my understanding, even in the normal rules, that nobody made an offer that was the maximum offer that a passenger could be offered under those rules.
Thank you, Senator. And first, this situation was not because of overbooking, as most of our oversale situations occur for operational reasons. Weight restrictions due to weather are the most common, where we can't take off with a full load of passengers or land with a full load of passengers. In this particular situation, our employees are authorized to go up to a certain limit, and they concluded on the airplane that no one was going to go even at that limit, so it's not clear why they didn't go all the way to the limit. But what we have done, and one of the clear findings from this, is we need to give our employees more tools and more flexibility. That's why, by going up to $10,000 and by creating this alternative travel desk that can get people to different destinations that might be close to their home, we really believe that we're going to be able to drive our involuntary denied boardings close to zero. And that's one of our goals, is to get involuntary denied boardings close to zero, where we can accommodate all the customers in a way that customers view as a win-win solution.
And did you say that more people are taken off planes or not put on planes because of weight and safety issues than that you've sold more seats?
Yes, sir. The vast majority of our involuntary denied boardings, at American, it's about two-thirds of our or at United, it's about two-thirds of our involuntary denied boardings come from operational issues, usually weight restrictions for weather or an aircraft swap, which is often, it's either because of maintenance or because of weather, where the airplane couldn't arrive in the destination in time to take the flight. Those operational issues where you have to take 20 or 30 passengers off an airplane are where we have involuntary denied boardings. Overbooking usually has 1 to 2 passengers that are over the limit, and generally speaking, we can get someone to volunteer by giving them alternative compensation and alternative travel arrangements. And in the vast majority of those cases, we can get a customer that volunteers, and we view that as a win-win. If a customer is willing to accept the alternative compensation, that we've left the customer satisfied.
Commissioner Evans, you said that what happened with the flight that Dr. Dow was on was not in accordance with your guidelines for the law enforcement or the police officials? How do you categorize, by the way, the people that do this job for you at the airport?
Thank you, Senator.
Push a button to turn your mic on, and let me be sure I've got this right. How do we refer to the people that got on the plane?
They are referred to as aviation security officers. They are non-sworn, non-armed security personnel. Their primary responsibility is to enforce the federal security laws. So, alarm doors, and make sure that people who are in certain areas of the airport have the proper badge. They patrol the perimeters to make sure that...
Why do you think they didn't comport to what you say your procedures were?
The details of exactly what was said is being thoroughly investigated by the Inspector General in terms of their what they were thinking or why they did what they did. I have to wait for the findings of that report to know. I honestly don't know at this point why they...
Think it's a lack of training?
We certainly will enhance our training. I think that it's such an infrequent event. It really is an aberrant event. We can't actually find another instance. It's so infrequent for, in particular, those officers. Normally, it is Chicago police who boards the plane. We have made it clear in the future that those aviation security officers will not board the plane. They are to wait for Chicago police. We've had, we have 6.5 million passengers a month go through O'Hare, 6.5 million a month. So this is a very rare occurrence, so there's no question that training for such an infrequent event needs to be enhanced because of the severity of it. And certainly the directives need to be crystal clear.
Right. Ms. Nelson, just one quick question here, and you will have to be concise or I'll violate my own rule to try to keep us to our 5 minutes. And I may have to ask it a different round, but my question will be, had both United and Commissioner Evans suggest that people aren't going to get on planes anymore except with, let's see, one phrase was great physical risk. What does that do if you're on the plane to your ability to deal with a passenger who doesn't want to be dealt with?
Well, if we're on the plane and someone doesn't want to be... If we are on the plane and someone doesn't want to be dealt with, we have to advocate through the flight deck that we have a security concern. And in those cases, we should be having assistance from law enforcement. Or there are other tools that the airline can use, and we would be working together as a team with the flight deck, with the ground service coordinators, and it may be that the entire plane needs to be deplaned. So these are some of the tools that we have today to be able to deal with that, but we do need the assistance of law enforcement when it is a safety or security issue.
We'll see how this goes and see if I need to come back to this topic later. Ms. Cantwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I listened to the testimony across the board, and I just want you to know that nobody has fought harder during the time that Wall Street prices drove fuel for airlines up, quadrupling and costing us. So we were there, and many people came and participated in those press conferences and what it was doing to the industry. I was also there when last year or 2 years ago when we put an FAA bill together and we didn't give flight attendants the same rest time as pilots. We should correct that this time and make sure that there is even parity. So I understand the larger challenges to the airline industry, but it is still no excuse for dehumanizing the aspects of passenger travel and just making them part of someone's business plan. And we have to come back and look at the stress that is being caused on the system as we have deregulated and put this in this game of monopoly, but not giving the passengers a fair end of the stick. So I do want to get to you, Ms. Greenberg, about what you think is in the Passenger Bill of Rights, because I have my own ideas about what should be in a Passenger Bill of Rights. But Mr. Kirby, I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. You saying that Mr. Dow's flight was not an overbooked flight?
No, ma'am. His flight was overbooked by one, but we had a customer compensated and removed from the flight before boarding. The situation with Mr. Dow was not caused by overbooking. It was caused by putting 4 crew members on the airplane after the flight was already boarded. Policies that we've changed so it can never happen again.
And what do you consider that, putting 4 crew member on a flight?
Well, in this case, it was just wrong. We booked.
I think it's your definition of overbooking that was wrong. And so you're parsing words here, which does not give me the faith that you fully understand the severity of this situation. By that I mean that the airlines are treating passengers as an algorithm. They're part of a computer-based system where when you want to take someone off the flight, you go to the person, as in Mr. Dow's case, who doesn't have a frequent flyer, paid the lowest fare, checked in at the last boarding time. So you basically are picking by algorithms who you want to kick off of a flight. And to now think that you can say that overbooking here at this hearing this morning does not include your crew members, you have to compensate for the traveling of your crew members, but you can't then get an exemption on, oh, well, that's not overbooking. So I'm really befuddled by the fact that you're parsing this morning in a way that makes me think that, this is what's going to end up in a passenger bill of rights. We're going to tell you how you can and can't operate to protect consumers and the traveling public. We are not going to turn them into an algorithm of the cheapest purchased ticket is going to now get booted off because you're going to continue to communicate this way.
Ma'am, I'm sorry if I'm not communicating well. We do use the term overbooking to mean very specific where the airline is selling more seats than there are on the airplane.
You should compensate in a travel plan where your crew is part of that and stop using them as an addition to the overbooking. You need to compensate for them before.
Yes, ma'am.
If you want us to legislate that, we will, because we're not going to run into the same situation.
Yes, ma'am, we do that. In this case, what happened was their previous flight got canceled. That's why they were being booked at the last minute. When we normally travel crews, we book them and take a seat out of inventory for them.
Ms. Greenberg, you mentioned this. What do you think we should do about this issue as it relates to the fact that I think they still want a little bit of room here on changes in flights and schedules and getting crew to a certain location? What do you think we should do about that?
Well, I think the issue of overbooking or these days is really a thing of the past. It ought to be, because every passenger who pays has paid up front for their ticket. There should be no instances when you've paid for a ticket and you're sitting in your seat where you're taken off the flight. We don't understand why that needs to happen, since the airlines, in the old days, airlines were out of pocket because people would make reservations on 5 different flights and wouldn't show up for perhaps 4 of them. But now the airlines have that money in the bank, and so we think that they ought to be accommodating the fact that all of those seats are paid for. And I don't understand why we continue to have this problem with overbooking, and why airlines continue to overbook and are pocketing, those profits sometimes twice over.
And what do you think, any of the panelists, like, who should be making these decisions in the context of now we're hearing from the airlines that they're no longer going to do this, that they're going to compensate people in a range of fees? But my question is, who's going to decide that, and who's going to make these decisions along the way? I just feel like the airlines are basically leaving too much of this to interpretation at the gate level, and we need to build a culture within the airlines who are going to have management who are responsible for these kinds of decisions and actions, and not just pushing it down either to the flight attendants or the gate people to enforce.
Well, if one of the things we mentioned in our testimony is we would like to see a European Union style system where you're guaranteed a certain level of compensation for a flight that's canceled, for a flight that's delayed, depending on how long the flight is delayed and the distance that you're going. European consumers have far more robust consumer protections than we do in the United States, and we don't understand why that should be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My time is up.
Senator Wicker.
Mr. Kirby, since this incident in Chicago, how's business been at United?
Well, sir, while this was a horrible incident that was terrible and shameful to all of us at United, for the most part, everything else at United is going really well. That's one of the things that is also disappointing to us because operationally United is running the best airline in history that we've ever run.
Well, how's your how are your boardings? You've had as many bookings as before?
Sir, it's impossible for us to see in the data.
Okay. Well, how's your stock been last 3 weeks since this incident?
Our stock initially went down, but has recovered since. But our
matter of fact, it's higher now than it was the day of the incident. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You know, I think. What do you think that says? Well, let me try.
Stock price?
I think it says that you've got the passenger where you want him. I think it says there's not enough competition in the industry, and people that had to fly with United before still have to fly with United if they want to get somewhere. And there really is no choice, so business is really back where it was. I remarked to my wife when I saw on TV how much the stock had dropped. If I didn't mind disclosing it, and if I weren't a public official, I would have seen it as a buying opportunity, because it was obvious to me that the passenger has nowhere else to go. And so it's not surprising to me that your stock has returned, because basically your boardings are going to be about the same. If the traveling public wants to boycott United as a result of this outrageous incident, which you say you've corrected, they really don't have a way to boycott you, do they?
Sir, there's lots of competition, and they have a way to boycott us. I would like to think that our stock recovery is because we truly are going to fix the airline and make customers at the center of everything we do. And that commitment that we've adopted is going to help us not only improve for customers, it's going to help us improve for our employees, and that will lead to better results for the shareholders. And we absolutely are committed to improving, and our customers do have choice. There's great competition in the U.S. airline industry.
Ms. Greenberg, what is your view on that issue?
We've got an extremely concentrated industry with 80% of flights across the country being run by 4 airlines. If I fly out of Chicago,
I pretty much am. In many instances, there's no place for me to go if I want to boycott United because of this. Is that correct?
That's correct. The passengers have, just to give you a statistic on that, at 40 of the largest 100 airports, a single airline controls a majority of the market. At a staggering 93 of the top 100 airports, 1 or 2 airlines control a majority of seats, an increase from 78 airports in 1995.
How are we doing on people with disabilities, particularly disabled veterans? It's my understanding that in 2015, more than 30,000 passengers filed disability-related complaints with the airlines. And in 2016, 862 complained directly to the federal government. In 2015, 944 complained directly to the federal government. Ms. Pinkerton, how are the airlines doing in that regard?
Well, thank you for asking. That's an issue that we have paid attention to in the last couple of years. In fact, the last FAA extension bill that this committee passed had 2 provisions relating to access for the disabled. I sat in on the first issue that was mandated, and that was a GAO study to look at how carriers are training our crew with respect to how they handle wheelchairs, damaged wheelchairs, et cetera. From that, DOT created new training that carriers are incorporated into their own training. But the second issue was that you all required a rulemaking. And that rulemaking got underway. It was a negotiated rulemaking. Carriers sat down with the disabled community and DOT and engaged in a negotiated rulemaking. We came up with long-term and short-term solutions. There was agreement. For the long term, we agreed on a larger laboratory for single-aisle planes. In the short term, there were 3 things. It was, again, relating to training and better information, both for the disabled community about what their rights were, but also for airline crew. And also, there is a label that will be put on planes that have an international standard that is like a good housekeeping seal of approval if they meet certain criteria. And with respect, I know Senator Cantwell's not here, but she mentioned the paralyzed veterans. We have been ongoing having a dialogue with them. They've asked us not to talk publicly yet about what agreements we are coming to, but I can tell you that those conversations are progressing. So my response is that we recognize that this is an issue and we've been taking it seriously, working on it, and I think that things are changing. But if I can, please take the opportunity to respond to your concerns about competition, because it's a narrative I've heard. And I think the reason the narrative about there's no competition doesn't work is because we've got proof that there's competition, and the proof is, and not according to a Wall Street Journal article, but according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, fares are lower today than they ever have been as a percentage of disposable income. They're down 20% from 1995. We've got more seats added. Small, I think you missed my opening statement, but small and non-hub airports have actually seen increases in seats. We've added a net of 54 new destinations. So, and you were talking about customer service earlier. The independent studies at J.D. Power and the American Consumer Satisfaction Index, I think one of the reasons maybe you haven't seen the stock change is because people realize that what was a completely unacceptable event and should never happen again was extremely rare and is not indicative of the things that our employees serve to the traveling public in the 2.2 million passengers and 27,000 flights we fly every day.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Blunt, as well as Senator Cantwell, for holding this important hearing. I'd asked for this hearing, as did many other members that are here today, because I think everyone was outraged by this video, deeply disturbing video of Dr. Dow being dragged off this plane. I think most everyone in this room, including the airline's executives, now agree that this should never have happened, and it was a result of a series of failures and some flawed policies. Of course, the focus of today's hearing is on not just the single incident, but to make sure that passengers are treated fairly and with the respect they deserve. And this has been a focus that I've had for quite a while with the Passenger Bill of Rights that I pushed hard for, and some of these other safety and cost measures that we've worked on. I guess I'd start with you here, Mr. Kirby. Clearly, one of the failures during this flight incident was not offering passengers greater compensation to volunteer to be bumped when there were so many overbookings on the flight. And your report states that the gate agent never offered more than $800. And I understand United's new policy allows volunteers to be compensated up to $10,000. Will frontline employees be authorized to offer up to this level of compensation in all cases, or are there going to be restrictions?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. We gate agents will have a certain limit, and then it escalates up to all the way up to $10,000. But it does require an escalation of increasing levels of management. Although the gate agents' limits are greatly increased from where they were before. One of the other things we're doing is also having annual recurrent training to help gate agents with this process and with de-escalating situations as well. One of our findings that was in our report is we didn't do an adequate job of giving recurrent training to gate agents so that they were able to deal with this really difficult situation. And our practices on going to the top of the limit were inconsistent. And this training, we hope, will get us to consistency with all of our employees.
You mentioned in your testimony that United has made adjustments to its overbooking policies, that there will be a reduction in overbookings on flights that historically have experienced lower volunteer rates, smaller aircraft, last flights of the day. I want to make sure this will have a real impact. How significant will the reduction in overbooking be for these flights? And will United continue overbooking at the same rates for flights outside of these categories?
Thank you again, ma'am. The kinds of reductions we talked about, I'll give you one simple statistic. For 50-seat regional jets, for example, which is where we tend to have the highest problems, because if you're over by 1, it's 2%. If you have a 200-seat airplane, you're over by 0.5%. Harder to get a volunteer with fewer passengers. So on 50-seat regional jets, about 50% of our flights before were overbooked by 1, could be overbooked by 1, and those have now gone to 0. So it's on small regional jets, just as a data point, it's about a reduction of half of the flights. And as to the rest of the system, we will be lowering it across the board, partly because the cost of a denied boarding is now much higher. Now that we'll go up to $10,000.
All right, I have about 2 minutes left. I have 2 questions, so I'll start with you, Ms. Greenberg. In your testimony, you call airlines' contracts of carriage indecipherable legal tomes. I like that. Do you have a suggestion for how to make it easier for airline passengers to understand their rights?
Yeah. We believe that there ought to be European-style posters around letting consumers know what their rights are. We believe there ought to be a list of compensation and required compensation if you're bumped involuntarily, and if your flight is canceled, if your flight is delayed after a certain amount of time. Those are rights and protections.
So you mean those would be things that would be required to be put up in airports?
Right, and that's what you see in the European Union, and we want those kinds of protections and transparency and information for consumers in the United States as well.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nelson, thanks for the work from the flight attendants on human trafficking and the bill that we passed together. In your testimony, you discussed disturbing reports of verbal and physical assaults on flight attendants in the wake of some of these incidences. You say that flight attendants can get caught in the middle of an us against them mentality. This can make it harder for them to perform their duties. What additional support outside of the training that Mr. Kirby mentioned do you think that airlines should give flight attendants to ensure that they can do their job safely and effectively?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Senator. One of the issues that we have seen over the last several years is that the FAA has moved from instruction on enforce to inform passengers. And this has put us in a quagmire of doing our safety compliance checks, but not really having the ability to enforce those, so that some people are able to sort of get away with not following the safety policies that could put everyone else in danger, and others are not. This is already a problem. But the biggest problem that we see is that we do not have the staffing that we used to have prior to September 11th, 2001. And so as we have more passengers and capacity has been cut, and so our planes are fuller than ever, we do not have enough flight attendants to be able to get to situations and de-escalate. Because frankly, the nation's flight attendants do an incredible job of de-escalating conflict every single day with all of these flights getting out without incident. And we are seeing that this is something that we have to deal with every single day. So if there were more of us to be able to do that work, we could do it more effectively. We also see that at the gate, where now, because there are minimums on the plane and there are minimums at the gate, we can't effectively communicate with each other. Also, we have problems coming down to the airplane door more often because we do not have the staffing at the gate. The gate agents are not catching the things that they would normally be catching in the gate area, and that then is creating conflict on the plane. So these are some of the issues that we are facing, and we would like to be a part of implementing the policies to make sure that they're done in a way that works on the plane.
All right. Thank you very much.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. My view is that today's hearing is the beginning, rather than the end, of Congress's oversight role in protecting not only consumers, but also the people who work on airlines. And I just want to begin, Ms. Nelson, with a question to you, and thank you and everybody who works with you, everybody who serves on our planes, for their immense service and often sacrifice to the airlines for whom they work and the customers who rely on them, and the many heroic acts that you mentioned in your testimony. Can you give me some assessment of air quality in that cabin?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people get on the plane, they have no concept of what they may be encountering.
Yeah. This has been an issue for our union for 3 decades. We work to get smoking off the planes. We work to decrease the spraying of pesticides so that people can have clean air. But we have an issue that's still remaining, and that is the bleed air that is bled off the engines into the cabin can become contaminated and can bring poisons into the toxins, which will affect the crew, oftentimes at a higher rate because they are working harder, so their heart is pumping harder. But this has caused from basic illness and feeling fatigued and having headaches to long-term effects of memory loss and inability to function. We have had crews who have actually become completely incapacitated because of this, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And we thank you for working on this. We need to identify when these things are happening so that we can have sensors on the plane and have a data collection so that we can scientifically look at the problem and address it in a way to make sure that everyone is safe.
These problems affect people who ride the planes as customers as well as the airline attendants who work on them.
Our workspace is your travel space, and we want it to be safe, healthy, and secure for all of us.
And the only difference is that the airline attendants spend more time and are exercising more, so they're breathing more deeply, but it affects passengers as well.
Absolutely, and let's not forget about the pilots who are flying the plane, too.
And the pilots, and probably more than anyone, children who are flying, because they have smaller bodies, smaller lungs, and so what they breathe at the same concentration is likely to affect them more.
Yes.
Let me just say to all of you, in the short time I have, that I am working on a passenger Bill of Rights that will expand the current rights that are in our statutes. One thing is clear to me from this United episode and from countless other instances. Now there's the capacity for them to go viral, but that's only spreading more information about them. They've always occurred, and they will not be corrected by the airlines themselves acting voluntarily. We know that from history. So the actions by United that have been done so far, which are only voluntary, and by other airlines raising compensation levels, for example, or providing limits on the length of time airlines can keep passengers stuck on a Carmack, refunds for lost or damaged bags. Those kinds of rules are completely inadequate, and again, they are completely voluntary. They ought to be made a matter of statute, and they ought to be expanded because consumers need real rights, and that's why I will introduce a passenger's Bill of Rights as this committee considers an FAA reauthorization bill in the coming weeks. And I am open to working with you. I've outlined some of the provisions which are raising compensation levels from the present cap of $1,350 to multiples of the ticket price when passengers are bumped. I understand the airline's argument that it has to overbook for profits, but they also have to bear the financial burden that right now is passed to consumers when those flights are overbooked and the consumers are bumped. So I will propose legislation that will stop the kind of bumping we see now and will provide for greater compensation for passengers, will prohibit taking passengers off planes involuntarily, and the use of law enforcement for that purpose, along with other measures, compensation for delays and cancellation, a right of action by individuals against airlines with the potential for punitive damages, which will send a financial as well as moral message, and other steps providing for greater disclosure of fees and charges, connection with bags, checked bags, carry-on luggage, and so forth and so on. That's a rough and incomplete outline, and I'd like the commitment of this panel that you will work with me on this endeavor. Is there anyone who would object to any of these ideas, or at least working with me on them?
We'll be happy to work with you, Senator.
Thank you.
Happy to work with you, Senator. I would just note that many of the things that you've outlined, whether it's eliminating the cap on compensation, saying we're not going to take a person off of the plane, not calling law enforcement, all of those things are things that carriers have said voluntarily they're willing to do, and they are doing those and implementing those today.
And my time has expired.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank you and Senator Cantwell for holding this hearing today, and it's particularly timely. Unfortunately, there have been recent incidents that have involved airline passengers gone way beyond even what seasoned travelers have ever seen, and obviously what we saw with the video of the United Express flight in Chicago 3 weeks ago really was shocking. If there's anything positive in all this, I think it's the fact that many airlines seem to be changing policies as a result of some internal reviews and some self-examination, and that's exactly what should happen. And I hope all the attention that is now being paid to the treatment of passengers will lead to long-term and meaningful improvements in the passenger experience. If not, there's going to be increasing interest on this committee and in the Congress. I also want to say at the same time, I think it's, I hope, because it's really important that passenger frustrations don't lead to unnecessary confrontation. Safety is still the paramount consideration in air travel, and the current level of safety is something of which we all can be proud. We don't want anyone to resist lawful and appropriate instructions from airline personnel or others that might impact that laudable record. And I think everybody probably would agree that sometimes a little more patience and understanding would go a long way. Commissioner Evans, before the recent United Airlines incident, how common was it for your department's aviation security officers to board an aircraft, and what types of situations were they typically dealing with?
It is very rare for the aviation security officers. Normally, Chicago police make those responses. We are correcting that. This was an aberrant situation. We don't know of anything similar in our records. Most commonly, the complaints that come are unruly passengers, someone who won't obey the instruction of a flight crew, or an altercation between two passengers of some sort. That is the most common response type of a disturbance that we get on an aircraft. It's fairly rare. I commented earlier, we have 6.5 million passengers a month through O'Hare. Total dispatches for disturbances in a month, somewhere between 15 and 20, and on an aircraft, maybe 4 or 5. So in total, they're fairly rare, a minuscule percentage, and they have been extremely well handled in the past. So we're terribly sorry that this one was not handled properly.
Mr. Kirby, that April 9th incident has had a big impact, obviously, on United Airlines and frankly, the whole industry. How confident are you that the steps that you and your company are taking will actually prevent another incident like that from occurring?
Thank you, Senator. I'm highly confident that the situation that occurred here just can't happen again, because the policies wouldn't allow it to happen again. But we're going to take it beyond that, and we've used this to be really a watershed moment for United Airlines, and to go beyond just preventing this from happening again, and to truly put the customer at the center of everything we do, and hope that this is going to have a silver lining of actually making us, and we believe it will, make us a better airline today than we were before by that change of focus.
There are always, and we know this, factors that are outside of your control, but consumers do have an expectation that they'll get what they pay for when they buy an airline ticket. So as a follow-up to that question, what steps is United taking to more generally improve what can sometimes be a stressful travel experience for your customers, and especially in light of the knowledge that outside factors can upset the normal operating plan?
Yes, sir. It is true that travel can be a stressful experience. At United Airlines, while we had a terrible incident this month or last month, we are proud of the progress we've made in running a better operation. In 2016, we set new all-time records. In 2017, we're setting new records. In the month of April, we went 145 hours without a single flight cancellation. That's over 10,000 flights around the world without a single cancellation. Our employees are delivering just phenomenal customer service. I can't walk around the city of Chicago without hearing from customers about what a great job our flight attendants, gate agents are doing. We're back to growing. We're growing 6% this summer, which gives more options for our customers. We feel really good about the future, but something like this should have never happened, and we let a rules-based culture, which is appropriate for safety, get in the way of common sense when it comes to customers. And that's a change that's going to make things even better.
And it just seems like there ought to be an operating plan in light of some of these contingencies and outside factors that may be not frequent, but certainly occur. Very quickly, Ms. Nelson, you and members of your that are on the front line of an industry that's seeing more and more confrontation. Mm-hmm. So what are the possible consequences if passengers start questioning or refusing instructions from flight attendants, from your members?
This could cause a safety problem for everyone on board. Take, for example, the seatbelt sign. When flight attendants are informing that you need to be in your seat when the seatbelt sign is on, we saw recently the incredible injuries on the flight where the airplane hit clear air turbulence and people were thrown through the plane. This can, if you are up, you can be injuring other people on the plane. So if you're not following the instructions of the flight attendants, it can cause harm to other people around. And we also have some very serious concerns about the videotaping and broadcasting of crew movement, and also showing, frankly, the terrorists the diversionary tactics that could be used to divert crew from their safety and security functions, and also to divert crew from being able to instruct passengers when we need help to contain a security concern. These are some of our grave concerns, in addition to the fact that there is an atmosphere out there right now that flight attendants are facing that is just generally dangerous. We have reports of people who have touched flight attendants inappropriately, and when flight attendants have told them to stop, they have said, "What are you going to do? Drag me out of here." And this is not okay. This is what they're facing on the front lines. We need backing from the regulatory agencies to talk about the role that we have. To Sally Greenberg's point about having placards in the gate area, it needs to be reinforced to follow the crew member instructions for your safety and security concerns. And we need more staff to be able to handle these issues and de-escalate the situations, because the reality is when aviation workers across the industry saw that video, we were horrified, because it's not a representation of who we are, how we take care of our passengers every single day, and how we care very deeply about making this a good experience for the people in our care.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. And Senator Nelson.
And I think that is certainly a true statement that you said. And if anyone wants to feel good about an airline, watch the movie Sully about Captain Sullenberger and the way that crew operated under extremely dangerous circumstances, which is not a Hollywood made-up movie. That was real life. And you saw those flight attendants working with the captain, who's the last one to get off the plane, the captain. So indeed, I want to shift gears a bit, and I know you've been beat upon, Mr. Kirby, and of course people are upset about all of this that's happened, but let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about things that make common sense. So in the past month, I flew United, and I got to the airport at the appointed time, and my flight was late, and I looked, and lo and behold, on the board, there is an earlier flight that is going to my destination, and it was late. And so I walked to that gate, and in fact, they were loading passengers, and in fact, they had seats. And so I said, I'm on the next flight. I would like to go on this flight if you have seats. And they had seats, but said that will be $75 extra. Now, I was on official business, and I did not think that was a good expenditure of Senate funds, but it was a policy of the airline that made no sense. You had seats, And oh, by the way, on the next flight, which was mine, you didn't have seats. So by me going on the earlier flight, it would have opened up a seat for the later flight, and yet I was, according to your policy, going to be required to pay an additional $75. It's those kind of rules that maybe you have a reason for it, but it just doesn't make sense, and it's not in your interest either, because you need to accommodate the traveling public. Give you another example here. Major airlines, including United, typically charge consumers $200 or more for changing or canceling a domestic flight. Change fees for international flights can run many $100s. And so now it appears that United has introduced a new type of fare, basic economy is what you call it, where no changes are allowed at all. And in that case, consumers would lose the entire value of the ticket. So when booking, the consumer typically receives little notice of all these additional penalties. So what's the correlation for you between change and cancellation fees and the cost actually incurred by United?
Well, Senator, thank you for your business, and I apologize for the bad experience that you had on United. I would say...
That's not a bad experience. That is a policy that you all lost a seat that you could have filled on an oversold flight.
Yes, sir. I think actually our policy in those situations where we have an off-schedule operation should have let you get on the earlier flight, but I'll confirm that after this hearing would have been the normal policy. Our basic economy product, which you also referred to, that first we try to clearly communicate to customers the restrictions associated with that product, and the goal is to offer low fares. And we're trying to offer our customers choice. One of the great things in a deregulated environment is we're offering our customers more choice. And for customers that are willing to give up some of those restrictions and accept the restrictions of no changeability, they get a lower price. And we think that's good for consumers. So far in our tests, about 30 to 35% of customers are choosing that lower fare, and 60 to 65% of customers are choosing the regular economy fare, which costs more but comes with more restrictions. I recognize the frustration around change fees. It is part of our view of what lets us offer low fares for leisure customers that are bought in advance. We also offer fares that are fully changeable and that come with no penalties, no restrictions. They are more expensive. It is part of our policies, and it's part of the rationale is by offering customers choice and by offering them different products, we can let the customer choose what is most appropriate for them, and it helps us keep fares low. And
does it save you money?
It's not a direct cost when somebody changes, if that's the question. It does. It was about $900 million of revenue at United Airlines in 2016.
Well, if it doesn't save you money, you may want to put yourself in the place of the consumer. Things come up. They need to change their flight. But it then becomes so prohibitive that they can't. And therefore, they're inconvenienced. And if there's not a direct cost associated to you that you're having to pay, you may want to think of put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. Mr. Chairman, I know we've got lots of members, and I'm going to stop. What I'd like to do is to insert for the record for Mr. Kirby some questions about his IT systems, and then to Ms. Pinkerton, questions about airline passenger Bill of Rights, and to Ms. Pinkerton and Mr. Kirby, questions about interline agreements.
Every member will have a chance to submit questions for the record. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nelson, I was enjoying your comments. My daughter-in-law is a retired flight attendant. And I've heard a lot of things before, and I could probably add to a few things that you said. You know, you hear a lot of negative things about the industry, and it happens, maybe I'm biased because American has a huge presence, a huge footprint in my state of Oklahoma, my city of Tulsa. And in fact, I've worked with them over the years. When I was mayor of Tulsa, things would come up, and my experience actually has been good in terms of their focusing on using technology to swiftly inform consumers of any disruption to their travel. And they've actually invested billions of dollars in airport terminals and all of these things. So there are some things that are going on that have been good, in my experience. Ms. Pinkerton, when we talk about the wish to change things, are there any obstacles that airlines have in not being able to do some of the things that we might be thinking they could do unilaterally? Are there obstacles out there that make it more difficult to make changes?
Well, I would note that the Mercatus Center has said that the airline industry is the 6th most highly regulated industry in the country. Now, some of those things are safety regulations. I would say that even with some of the safety regulations, though, the way they're implemented in kind of a one-size-fits-all, whether that's the flight and duty rule or the 1,500-hour rule, et cetera, I think that there are some modifications that could be made so that there's not the operational impact that we see from some of those rules. But really the things that give us more pause, Senator, are the economic rules of the industry, the things like full fare advertising rule that tell us you can't advertise your product, you have to advertise it all in. We're one of the few industries that's required of. And then, of course, there's a push now to try to force us to do business with certain people, for example, like Cheapo Air. There's a move that says you have to give your fares and information to Cheapo Air, and we'd like to be able to make those decisions ourselves about who we do business with. So it's things like that where we'd like to see less government intervention. I think that a lot of this rulemaking are well-intentioned, but they end up tying our hands and costing consumers more. And we're all here talking about the consumer, and I think one of the things the consumer really values is the low fares that we've been able to bring with them, and of course, more service. And so, frankly, the more financially stable we are and the more freedom we have to do our business, we're going to be able to lower fares, we're going to be able to add seats, we're going to be able to pay our employees more, add more jobs, and those are things that we've been doing within the last 6 years.
You've got to make those considerations. I've listened to a lot of really good ideas, I guess, expressed by people that, and maybe through a pilot's bill of rights or something. But I looked, Mr. Kirby, at what you've done, and I guess this question would be for you. The tragedy of that flight. I mean, that's awful, and to see the pictures and the public is out there. There's a level of outrage that is kind of unprecedented that I hadn't seen before. But what you've done in 30 days is pretty amazing. You've already settled a lawsuit. You've increased the incentive for passengers to give up their seats and a lot of other things. Look, I've been around here a long time. Maybe we have solutions here in government, but I don't recall any time that we've been able to work as fast as you guys have in correcting a problem. So I want to keep that in mind. And I don't know of a lot of things that can be done. I am concerned, and I won't ask you this. I won't ask you because I think it might be unfair. So I'll go back to Ms. Pinkerton. Do you think that a lot of new federal laws and regulations imposed as a response to this incident could cause more issues than it would resolve?
Oh, I absolutely do. A one-size-fits-all rulemaking approach doesn't work for this industry. We've seen that time and time again with unintended consequences. The tarmac delay rule ended up causing more cancellations, so people were more inconvenienced by it. I think what we've seen today is that airlines recognize that we need to step up on customer service, and we're willing to do that voluntarily.
Well, it's to your benefit. I mean,
Absolutely.
this idea that you have to be forced to do these things. You're the guy that pays for all this stuff, and I think everyone would agree to that. When I was chairman for a number of years of a committee called the Environment and Public Works, where all the over-regulations came, most of them were EPA regulations. So what we tried to do was to say any regulation that comes along, you got to put a price tag on it. It's going to cost something. And I would admonish my friends, if they're involved in the various proposed legislation, to maybe do the same thing. You can make these changes, but it's going to cost. You said just a minute ago, the cost of the ticket, that's a huge thing. And everything that I've heard suggested is going to impact that. So I think it might be a good idea for anyone who comes up with these good ideas to give credible evidence as to how that's going to affect the most important aspect, in my opinion, of individuals. That is the cost of their ticket. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to work right on through these questions. If anybody needs to take a break on the panel, as long as you take those breaks one at a time, we could probably get to you by the time you get back. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My experience would be this would be a good time for everybody to take a break.
I hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And but for all the other passengers, strap in your seatbelts. Okay? The ride could still be rocky before the end of this hearing. So airline fees are as high as the planes passengers are flying on, and it's time to stop their rapid ascent. Today, several airlines charge $200 change and cancellation fees, which may be greater than the value of the original ticket. That's on top of charging as much as $25 for the first checked bag, $35 for the second bag. That's $120 to do a round trip with 2 bags. Last year, airlines reaped in $4.2 billion in baggage fees and $2.9 billion in change and cancellation fees. That's $7.1 billion in 1 year. So passengers are getting tipped upside down at the ticket counter, and they deserve relief from these excessive fees. Regrettably, the fee epidemic is only growing. Some airlines are now charging passengers for carry-on bags, to print boarding passes, and for blankets to keep their children warm. That is outrageous. The airlines seem to have replaced the customer service counter with the customer suffering counter as they get the bill for each one of these things, which they should expect to come with flying. And passenger frustration with lack of choice and outrageous fees continues to rise. And that's why I reintroduced the Fair Fees Act, which ensures that airline fees are reasonable and proportional to the cost of the services provided, and Senator Blumenthal and I are introducing that bill. The Fair Fees Act puts a stop to fee gouging and will help ensure passengers are flying the fair and friendly skies. My bill will finally ground these ridiculous fees. Ms. Greenberg, is it reasonable to charge passengers $200 to change or cancel their flight, even if the passenger changes their reservations well in advance, even if the passenger purchased the ticket for less than $200, even if the airline resells the seat to another passenger at an even higher price? Is that fair?
Senator Markey, we think that these airline cancellation fees are outrageous. They don't reflect the cost to the airlines of accommodating reservation changes or cancellations. They actually, as you indicated, they can resell the seat perhaps much more expensively than the original cost. In 2016, they brought in nearly $3 billion in revenue, and things happen. People's plans change. Somebody might get sick. You're stuck. And there is no forgiveness for those fees. I've experienced it. The passengers let us know how frustrated they are about this. And we support your bill because we think there ought to be a relationship between the cost of rebooking somebody and what the passenger is expected to pay as a result of a change of plans.
Hey, Ms. Greenberg, this is a standard carry-on bag. Millions of passengers all across the country are forced to jam a week's worth of clothing into this
bag to avoid paying an additional $120 if the bags get checked. Is it really reasonable, Ms. Greenberg, to charge a person $120 to check the bags that are going back and forth on a week's trip just because they can't jam it all into one bag?
No, we agree with the Southwest Airline president several days ago in the House in the House hearing, who said, we think if passengers travel, they may want to carry their clothes along, and that we ought not charge them for checking a bag.
So some airlines claim they charge bag fees because checked bags are optional. Ms. Greenberg, is this carry-on bag a viable option for a passenger traveling from Boston to L.A. for a week?
Of course not. You have to carry your belongings, your toiletries, and so no, you have no choice.
So bottom line is that these fees are just not reasonable, and I'm going to fight very hard to make sure that these fees are checked in this FAA authorization bill, which we will be considering. And Ms. Nelson, could you just give us your view on mobile devices on planes in the passenger cabin? Could you tell us how the flight attendants view that change?
Yes, the flight attendants view voice conversations in the cabin the same as the public views them. We do not want them on the plane. This will create more conflict on the plane, and the DOT or through the FAA reauthorization bill, we should put the final nail in the coffin on this and make sure that there are no voice calls in the cabin. We have very serious security concerns, and we also have just a piece of flight concerns.
Thank you. I agree with you 100%. Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and our ranking member, and thank you to the panelists here. I know it's been a long morning. Look, we all agree that the recent incident in which United forcibly removed a passenger from the aircraft was unacceptable, and so what I think a lot of us are trying to do is now turn to next steps. I do want to acknowledge that United and other airlines have begun efforts to make reforms so that this kind of treatment of customers never happens again, and I thank you, Mr. Kirby, for that. But to the point some of the other senators have raised, this incident does not represent just a one-time occurrence or a one-time mistreatment. Constituents all across the Granite State, and I'm sure many individuals in this very room, have experienced routinely unpleasant flying episodes on one of the major airlines. In fact, just last year, the Department of Transportation, which tracks incidents like these, received 17,904 complaints across the industry, and those are just the cases that are reported. And I understand about percentages and statistics, but if you're one of those 17,904 people, statistics don't make much of a difference to you. So it's not acceptable that we have this level of difficult occurrences, and we can't just throw our hands and say that's the way it always has to be. Or in my view and many of my constituents, can we just say voluntary action by the airlines is enough? That's why I've introduced, along with some of my colleagues, the Tickets Act, which would improve transparency for consumers, review overbooking policies, guarantee paying customers have a right to fly, and make some other common sense reforms. I'm glad that United has made voluntary measures, taken them. It sends a nice message, but it's not the same thing as a guarantee. Consumers want to know that United won't change its mind later when the industry changes or the finances change. So I believe that consumers deserve to fly safely and comfortably, particularly at a time when the industry is earning record profits. And believe me, my constituents are aware of that too. So Mr. Kirby and Ms. Pinkerton, will you commit to working with me and my staff as we approach the FAA reauthorization on measures like those included in the Tickets Act that will improve air travel for customers?
Oh, yes, we're very happy to work with you, Senator. I do want to urge caution, and I think as we discussed previously, many of the items that are in your legislation do make sense, and that's why carriers have stepped up and said, yes, it doesn't make sense for us to remove a passenger from a plane. That said, I mean, I do urge caution in going into this kind of mandatory one-size-fits-all approach, because what we've seen in the past is that there are unintended consequences, and it does end up increasing the cost of travel, which, and I know all of the members on this committee feel strongly about service to their local communities. That gets impacted too, so we just need to be cognizant of those
I
impacts.
understand that. You always have to balance this, but I think a lot of my constituents would say that airlines treat them in a one-size-fits-all manner, and that they are not treated as individuals and customers with rights. And we are a democracy, and people's money is supposed to have value and buy them a certain expected experience, right?
We agree.
Thank you. Mr. Kirby.
Yes, ma'am. We absolutely will look forward to engaging with you and your staff on all these issues.
Thank you. And Ms. Greenberg, do you have comments or thoughts on the Tickets Act?
Yeah, we support the Tickets Act. I think it offers a lot of very positive benefits to consumers, including the issue of not allowing involuntary bumping, eliminating limits on the compensation for bumping, limiting overbooking practices, which we talked about a little while ago. We don't understand why overbooking happens, and requiring appropriate disclosures by the carriers. So yes, we think it's a great bill, and we look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you. And because my time is running down and it's been a long day, I will submit my other two questions for the record. I just did want to note, not only do I share the concerns about whether overbooking is still a policy that makes sense in this day and age, I'm very concerned that airlines have had policies that bump the passengers who either aren't frequent flyer members or have bought the lowest price tickets first. And since they are often people who can't afford to buy higher price tickets or become frequent flyers, that seems unfair. And finally, I'll just note, Ms. Nelson, I would look forward to working with you on some of the issues you've raised on behalf of flight attendants. We all appreciate the difficult work you all do and the importance of being able to de-escalate and help people travel safely.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks for the hearing. And I want to thank our panel for being here also. Recognize and realize this has been a long day, but I would like to get through my questions. I guess the first question is I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and that is that we realize that air flight and passenger care does determine the quality of any trip an individual goes on. The reason I'm saying this is that obviously a state like Nevada and tourism is an important function for us. It's just not Las Vegas, it's Hawaii, Orlando, or wherever, New York, wherever they may want to fly. And I don't want it lost with the emphasis that air travel is just as important sometimes as the experience that they may have at their destinations. I tell you that to say this. I asked a few years ago a gentleman from the southern end of Nevada who builds hotels why he doesn't build hotels in northern Nevada. This was a number of years ago, and he says because of the fact that when you fly into northern Nevada, whether it's the airport at Lake Tahoe or the airport in Reno, the flight is so turbulent that he doesn't believe anybody would come back after doing that one or two times. Now, technology obviously has increased substantially, and it's not nearly as bad as it was, 15, 20 years ago, and that's a good thing. But here's my reasoning. Last year, and Ms. Greenberg, maybe you can answer this. Last year there was an amendment by Mr. Schumer on a bill, and I don't recall what bill it was, and that was that he was going to regulate and determine what the size of seating should be in an airplane. Do you recall that?
Yeah, there have been several bills introduced to focus on the shrinking size of seats, the shrinking aisles, the shrinking baggage area, and the shrinking bathrooms in
Did your organization
airplanes.
have a position on that?
Do we have a position on it? Yeah, we think it's that this move toward shrinking these various getting through an airplane, legroom, everything else is a dangerous trend. It makes it harder for passengers to get in and out. It creates safety hazards if people have to deplane. It makes it much more difficult for citizens with disabilities to get in and out of an airplane. And so we do think there has to be some limits. The airlines don't seem to pay attention too much to the discomfort of consumers, because we had American Airlines today announcing that they're going to shrink yet again. Yeah. So yeah, if the airlines stopped shrinking size, we don't think there would be a need for such a bill, but unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of control unless we have such legislation.
What's more important, the room in an airplane with seats or your tray that goes up and down in front of you? Because they sure put a lot of emphasis on that tray. What about seating? What's more important when it comes to emergency getting in and out of the thing?
It's certainly the distance between seats, I think, is the thing that I would look at, and also the size of the bathroom and the size of the aisles and the overhead luggage. All of it, I think, is creating a very tense and frustrating situation for passengers.
Mr. Kirby, do you support legislation that would determine the amount of legroom in an airplane?
No, sir. And the reason is we want to offer our customers choice. It costs the same to fly an airplane, essentially almost exactly the same to fly an airplane, regardless of how many seats.
But it's choice with a cost. It's choice with a cost. If you want Economy Plus, you have to pay more.
Yes, sir. And fares have come down dramatically. Part of that is putting more seats on airplanes. Some of the bills wouldn't have that much effect on United, I think, because most of the bills were already compliant with those minimums. But for some airlines, you would be taking 10 to 20% of the seats off airplanes. And since it costs almost exactly the same to fly the airplane, prices just economically would go up 10 to 20%. And one of the great things that's happened for consumers, and we've talked about it some here today, is decline in airfares. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics said yesterday that real fares in Chicago O'Hare in the last 25 years are down 53%. And that's possible because there are more people on airplanes.
If you're taller than 6 feet, do you have to pay more to get on an airplane than someone that's shorter than 6 feet?
No, sir.
Are you more discomforted when you're taller than 6 feet than you are someone that's
yes,
under
sir.
6 feet? How about if you weigh under 200 pounds or more than 200 pounds? Are you more comfortable or less comfortable in one of your seats?
Imagine the larger you are, the less comfortable an airline or any other seat is.
Let me tell you why I'm answering that question. It says American Airlines, and you brought this up, this is out of CNN, is planning to decrease the front to back space between some of its economy seats by another 2 inches. American Airlines isn't the only one heading in this direction. United Airlines is considering a similar move. And it goes on to say that as the big airlines match each other's move for move, the risk is that 29 inches becomes the standard for flying economy in the United States. Is that going to become your standard?
Sir, I don't know for sure what our standard will be. Today, the majority of our seats are 31 inches or more of pitch. Some of the new seats actually have more personal space, and, pitch is probably not the right metric anymore because there's more personal space with some of the new seats. But we will endeavor to keep being competitive both on what customers want and on being able to offer low fares to our customers that prefer low fares.
Are you saying that, I apologize, one quick question. Are you saying that you will not go down to 29-inch pitch?
I'm not saying one way or another if we'll go to 29. We haven't made any final decisions.
Thank
you. Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you all for this enlightening discussion today. And I want to follow up with my colleague from Nevada and ask point blank, I'm not sure, answer the question. Is United going to cut legroom or looking at doing that?
Ma'am, we aren't making any, we're making some changes to existing aircraft today. None of those changes that we've announced so far go down to 29 inches.
Right, but does it go down to 28 inches?
No.
So you're currently at 31 inches, correct?
I believe we have some airplanes that have some rows that are at 30 inches, but by and large, we are 31 inches or more today.
And right now, no long-term plans to go down to 30, 29, 28 inches?
I don't know yet.
But you think that's part of customer choice?
Yes, ma'am. And if we were going, whether we're at any pitch, 30 inches, 31 inches today, we, on every airplane, offer seats that have more legroom, typically up to 34 inches, even in economy, to give, and large cabins, to give customers that choice, whether they want the lowest fare or whether they want more. And
can I ask, so those larger legroom, that's usually in the exit rows, or where else would it be located on the plane?
It's typically at the front of the economy. It's at exit rows and at the front of the economy cabin. Not always, because seating configuration is dependent on where the exit rows are from a physical location perspective. But as a general rule, they're at the front of economy and exit rows.
So a person with disabilities has no choice but then to take something at the front of the airplane because they normally cannot get back to the back of the airplane. So they're paying more for that.
No, ma'am. I believe that those customers are allowed to sit in the larger seat. I'm not sure. We can get back to you, but I believe they're allowed to sit up front.
That's good to know. And where are you based? In Chicago?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you get out here today? Flying commercial?
I came out actually on Sunday because I was also at the House hearing and I flew commercial.
Okay. Do you traditionally fly commercial?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you fly your own airlines?
In this case, I flew on one of the competing airlines because I came from Phoenix, Arizona.
And were you in economy or first class?
I was in 17E in economy.
Wonderful. And when you fly your airlines, are you usually economy or first class?
I'd say it's about 70% first class and 30% economy.
Okay. And when you fly economy, are you in the back of the plane?
I tend to be all over. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, so we go wherever we can find seats.
Yeah, I have a theory that if we required all executives to fly on their planes in the back of the plane, the consumer experience would be much better. And it is frustrating for me to hear that you're all about the consumer when every time I get on a commercial flight, there's nothing but complaints from consumers because there is not enough room, there is not enough leg room, there's not enough choice, even though you claim to have choice. And that's the unfortunate part of all of this, and that's why you see the frustration that you have here from all of us. But many of our consumers, many of our constituents, there is a problem there. And I think the other concern that I have is what it is happening to the flight attendants and the crew, because they are bearing the brunt of that frustration from those consumers who are flying. And so my next question for you is, you heard Ms. Nelson talk about the concerns that are happening right now with the employees that are on the planes flying every single day, from not enough staffing to the fact that airlines forget to and stopped informing passengers of how they should handle themselves on the plane, to also not enough staffing at the gate or on the planes themselves to help de-escalate situations. What are you doing in response, particularly United doing in response to Ms. Nelson's concerns?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator, and thank you, Ms. Nelson, for being here with us today. Our flight attendants are there primarily for safety. That is their primary role. And supporting them and creating safety for everyone on that airplane, including the employees and the customers, is our top priority, and it is their top priority. They're also incredibly important to the product. I tell our people all the time that the most important part of our product is not the seat pitch, it's not the meal, it is the flight attendants who interact with the customers. And they do remarkable things every day to take care of our customers, and they have a difficult job. And I have incredible empathy for what Ms. Nelson said. We spend a lot of time engaged with the Flight Attendants Union. One of the things I'm proud of at United that has changed, this is a change really in the recently since Mr. Munoz became CEO, is that we have a great relationship and partnership. We don't agree on everything, but we respect each other, and we spend a lot of time talking to them and on these issues. Now, some of them we don't always agree on, but we always listen. We listen respectfully to them and value and listen with an open mind and value their input, and we will continue to do that. And United Airlines will be a stronger airline in the long term by having a partnership with not just the flight attendants, but with all of our employee groups, and that's one of our critical goals. And one of the things we're proud of that we've really turned the corner on in the last 2 years, and it is at the core of everything we do.
My time is up, and I don't want to keep it going, but I would like to hear if there's further discussion on in the particular situation with Mr. Zhao. I understand United was contracting out with Republic Airlines. I'd like to know, and I haven't heard today specifically how and what type of controls and oversight that United has over those contractors, and what, if anything, you are doing now to take action against Republic for what happened with that
Mr. Kirby,
situation.
you'll take that for the record.
Yes, sir.
You'll take that question for the
So
record.
thank you.
Ms. Capito.
And thank you all for being here today. I was just trying to figure out what question I want to ask so I make sure I get the answer. So we talk about what happened, the unfortunate incident that happened in Chicago, and then the frustrations of a lot of people surrounding that. One of the issues that I think for me, and this is directed to you, Mr. Kirby, and I think many of us, is honesty could be the best policy in that, and I'm going back to the gate now. You're back at the gate, your flight is delayed, and you can get no information. Why is it delayed? How long is it delayed? And you know, in a lot of cases, they know. The gate agent knows. And I could be making alternative plans. In my case, it would be probably renting a car. What are your protocols at the gate to alleviate the frustration that builds when you know you're not getting the real answer?
Thank you, Senator, and I share that frustration. It is one of the things we need to improve. When I flew out here, my wife actually flew from Phoenix back to Dallas on another airline, and it was the day that there were tornadoes in Texas, and she was on a rolling 4-hour delay with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, got home at 11 and incredibly frustrated because no one could tell her what was going on. It's a problem, but part of the problem is we don't have good information. I promise you that our gate agents want nothing more than to tell you what's going on when they have information.
But when they have the information, are they told to give us the information? A lot of times I think they're sitting on information.
No,
I understand a thunderstorm in Dallas. I don't understand the flight attendant couldn't get here because they couldn't get a cab from New York City.
Yes, ma'am. I promise you our gate agents or flight attendants, if they know, one of the things we're doing at United.
They're empowered to tell.
Absolutely. One of the things we're doing at United is creating a new app that all employees will have a device for each individual airplane where they can all talk to each other. The problem is a lot of times there's a dispatcher back in Chicago that might know what's going on, but in a weather situation, that dispatcher is handling 20 or 30 flights, and they haven't told the gate, and they've got a complicated process to communicate to the gate or the flight attendants. And usually it's a flight attendant, a pilot, or a gate agent calling their management and asking, and then it gets bumped up the chain and comes back down. We got to give them more direct communication.
I would highly recommend that because I think that would pull the temperature down a little bit before you get onto the flight.
I absolutely agree, and we plan to roll that out this year.
Well, good. Quickly, on the checked bag issue that I've noticed recently, and we saw the bag that Congressman Markey had, those things can get quite heavy. And I'm worried about it from a safety aspect. Ms. Nelson, you all as helping and aiding passengers, but there's some passengers that can't get their bag all the way up. There's some passengers when they bring them down, Lord sakes, what's happening to them? Are there protocols around that? And is that an issue for you all?
It's a huge issue for us, and it is a huge issue of passenger-to-passenger conflict as well.
Yeah.
And we have been working actually for many years to try to limit the amount of carry-on baggage coming on board the flight. We were actually supportive of United's basic economy because it's going to limit the amount of baggage that's coming on the plane, which is going to cut down on the injuries for flight attendants and passengers as well, and make it a safer flight. So yes, we have absolute concerns about this, and we believe that this is actually something that could be taken on. We have tried to take it on in the past with having templates at TSA where the baggage does not even get through if it doesn't meet a certain size standard, and this is an issue that needs to be addressed for safety.
Yeah, Senator Capito, if I may just say, if the airlines stop charging $25, you would see that problem diminish substantially.
It definitely drives you to carry on. I agree with that. I want to go back to what the senator, the questioner before me asked, because we don't have a main line that comes into Charleston, West Virginia. We do have one Delta flight, but most of it is regionals or subcontractors. What kind are your protocols at United? Go all the way to every subcontractor that you have?
Yes, ma'am.
Flying under the United?
Under the United brand. Our view is whether a customer is flying on United Airlines or flying one of our regional partners, it is the United brand, and we need to hold it to the same standards. Our customers are buying a ticket from United Airlines, and we have to hold it to the exact same standards as we do the main line.
Well, that's good to know. I think that's really important. And then the last comment, I don't know if we have time for an answer on this. Ms. Pinkerton, you have alluded numerous times to the plunging fares. When you live in an area that doesn't have a lot of service, that has regionals, if I want to fly from Charleston, West Virginia to D.C. and back, which I do quite frequently, it's $600 for a round-trip flight. That I can fly probably, if I really hit it good, I could get to Hawaii on that, or maybe even over to Europe if I'm out mainline to mainline. You know, I'm flying a turboprop at 17,000 feet, Dash 8. What are you going to do? How can you justify? I don't understand the justification for such huge fares on such short hops and less expensive aircraft and they're full.
Yeah, I hear your frustration, but I think that, first of all, the fares that we talk about are obviously average fares and not necessarily, your location specific. But fares are essentially supply and demand. And from a small town, I think the fares are going to be more expensive. We do have good competition in this country. We have 4 large international carriers and 7 smaller domestic carriers. There are no barriers to entry. It's just a matter of which carrier wants to take on that service, and are they able to, is there a business case for doing so? Yeah. And I mean, that's essentially what it boils down to. And I think we need to be realistic about that in this country, about what type of service every small community can really afford to have. We want to grow service, and we are growing service. What I can say is that the more we regulate pricing, and especially Senator Markey's idea about regulating pricing. We used to regulate pricing in this country. In 1974, the flight from JFK to LAX was $1,480. Today, it's $320. So
I could go there twice for my fare.
Senator Capito,
Thank you.
We think competition would do wonders for your situation in flying to West Virginia, and we see the big 4 airlines trying to squelch competition when we want that to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also would like to thank the ranking member for convening today's hearing. Mr. Kirby, no one wants United to succeed more than I. I've been a Mileage Plus customer for 30 years. I joined when I was in college in Hawaii. So since 1986, I've been a Mileage Plus member. But it's clear to me that the mere fact that we're here today, that the incident aboard Flight 3411 was embarrassing and reprehensible, and I hope that you agree with that description of it. Thank you. So while United Airlines and the Chicago Department of Aviation are working out the important steps to correct the policies that allowed this incident to happen, I am really interested in how much more airlines can do to reaffirm the industry's commitment to customer service and complying with their contracts of carriage. And I'd like to, Ms. Pinkerton, talk a little bit about some of these issues. As the industry representative, I'm interested in learning more about the reforms you highlight in your testimony. Will you help compile a list of the reforms your individual airline members have already taken to improve customer service and submit them for the record?
Yes, I will do that. They're more detailed in my written testimony, but I'm happy to give you a greater inventory. Yep.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And Ms. Pinkerton, your organization successfully advocated for a delay in implementation of the mishandled baggage and wheelchair rule that would simply require large U.S. airlines to report on how often they've mishandled wheelchairs so that air travelers with disabilities can easily compare carriers and make informed travel decisions. Did the airline industry think this was in the consumer's best interest?
Well, I think what you're referring to is the fact that the Department of Transportation, when the administration changed, hit the pause button on all rulemakings. And what they said is they're creating regulatory reform task forces. There's an executive order that requires rulemakings to essentially be cost beneficial. And so I don't think hitting the pause button on some of these rules was a decision on the rule, but rather an opportunity to look at the process and make sure that the administration is going to move forward, and if so, how.
But Doug Mullen, the Assistant General Counsel at Airlines for America, sent an email to the Assistant General Counsel of USDOT asking that it be delayed until January of 2019, saying, and I quote, "Industry is facing some real challenges with both parts of this regulation, and we need more time to implement it." Would that be an
I think asking for more time to implement something is eminently fair. I think, I don't know if you were here earlier when I went through kind of the list of things that we have been doing to work with the disabled community, both on training, on increasing lab size, on information that's being put out to our crews, and the discussions we're having with the PVA. So this is an area that we've spent an enormous amount of time on. I can tell you in the last 3 years we take it seriously, and I think that we're making progress. If we need more time, you know, I think that that's an eminently reasonable request for more time.
As someone who travels and has traveled with a wheelchair for over a decade now, I've seen no improvement. And if anything, in the last 24 months, I've had 2 wheelchairs broken, and I don't see improved training of anyone, especially your baggage handlers.
I am sorry for that, and we want to fix that.
It doesn't appear that way, because it appears to me that you are trying to delay something as basic as collecting data and making it transparent to the public. I'm not asking you to come up with special, you know, extra handling systems. All this rule does is just says you just have to report how many wheelchairs you break. And as a consumer, I would like to be able to, just like I can look and see what this airline's on-time rate for this particular flight is 80%, and my on-time rate for this particular flight on a different airline is this, I can choose. The consumer should be able to choose. I don't think that that's an unreasonable thing, especially when that's already being done.
Right.
Isn't it? Individuals with disabilities are people too. And I have seen wounded warriors on flights to Miracle on a Mountainside being manhandled off a flight, further exacerbating their conditions. I have had to sit there and wait for my wheelchair to show up, and it doesn't show up, or it comes up in pieces. And I said I've been there most recently just within the last several weeks where a wheelchair came up broken. And this is multiple airlines. And you know, I think in a perfect world, Congress should not have to act. And airlines would treat all travelers with dignity and respect. And I think that's all that people with disabilities ask for. And I don't think, I should think that you would be wanting to speed up this process, not delay. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Well, thank all of you for responding to questions. Thank you for the questions you will respond to. The record will remain open for 2 weeks. During that time, senators can submit questions for the record, and when you receive these, you're requested to submit your written answers to the committee as soon as possible. This concludes the hearing. Thank the witnesses. Hearing's closed.
Thank you, Chairman.